Guidelines are often used to maintain a form of order within the online space, but its rules are often a projection of social norms and protocols we sustain offline as well. It can be seen as a social contract. But in comparison from online to offline protocols for social contact, does our offline world allow us to set and verbalize our own guidelines, or at least the illusion to do so? Unfortunately, also not in a lot of ways, because we still always have to confine with the rules of the public space. This varies widely. I can't even begin to compare Amsterdam with Singapore, where I'm not allowed to chew gum or take a durian with me in the metro. Knowing this isn't anywhere near to the restricting guidelines in Minnesota or Pyongyang at the moment.
What makes the online world appeal to me is that online those rules get blurred, only now we get to confine to the rules and guidelines of a platform instead of a government. These guidelines intrigue me. It makes me wonder, why can I not rely on the guidelines I set for myself? I'm not saying the web should go back to being the Wild West, because I'm thankful for a lot of the guidelines and restrictions that were set online. Yet I think it could be a lot nicer if I were free and able to also set my own. Almost if we were able to create an online private space, an online home, that I can welcome you in, that not just respects my guidelines but also yours. By visiting a website, all you are is a visitor, and when you are the host that sets the guidelines, all you are is a demanding host. Why can we not have space for everyone to decide their own online guidelines, making this the home of us all?
Us feel truly at home, in a space that isn't confined by borders. Content with our consent. Consent is a strange thing, since one of the first rules of social contact I learned is that it is not about the intentions of a message, it is about how the receiver perceives the message. In online communication, a lot of the tone of voice is lost, all is open for own interpretation. This can change all directions. In a way, it gives more power to the receiver already getting to choose the tone of voice. Yet we should be able to defend ourselves according to our own framework. This is when we have to look at our personal experience that creates our framework of consent. As a queer, multiracial, androgynous woman, artist, and activist, I don't expect my neighbor to have the same protocol of consent. And even with my neighbor having the best intentions with their post, it could violate my consent.
There is freedom of speech. Everyone is free to send out their opinions and not to say we should be ignorant. But we are also free to take in information and triggers we want. Right now we live in a time where social media serves as information resources. But not only information, also violence and harassment. There is a big importance of spreading otherwise censored violence that can catalyze action. The murder of George Floyd is the match that is now relighting the Black Lives Matter movement, because enough is enough. But this violent murder video has a different impact on every person. Whereas it can shock white people into finally recognizing a fucked up racist system, this video can also mentally harm black people. It is pure trauma, and they might not want to be reminded of the fact that they can be brutally murdered because of the color of their skin. Although this news is important, we now stand with this dilemma. And I believe this choice should not be up to the sender of the message but up to the receiver of the message. We should be able to give consent for the information we want to receive. And although yes, Instagram is blurring posts and asking for confirmation to see certain images, this is not enough. Because you don't know what will be behind the post ever. 99% chance you click on it either way, because you do not want other people to decide for you what is sensitive content or not.
Since we all have a different experience with what we do not want to see, we should be able to decide which information is sensitive to us. Not let a social media platform decide upon my censorship. Social media platforms are becoming nothing more than television news when looking at censorship.
Someone is now dictating I can't post my female nipples, but I can share murder. With every post conforming to their community guidelines. What about my own guidelines? A platform where everyone can set their own guidelines and options to filter out posts adjusted to your consent. Being able to change your consent settings at any time you like. For example, you could filter for extremist right, for advertisements that could trigger your shopping addiction, for smoking when you just quit, or for animal abuse that contains meat for vegans, thin models for those that battle eating disorders. I have to shortly mention porn, because yes, I would love to free my nipples and show sensual art, but porn is the big plague of the web, which is why there is such a wide filter on this. So often algorithms are used to wear off porn, resulting in censoring almost all nude images.
The idea would ask for a centralized system that is accessible and controllable by everyone. This would mean that anyone can flag a post as a certain category and perhaps even the level of sensitivity or intenseness Then after a certain amount of flags by trusted members, this would then identify a post as such. By this system it would allow you to have a social platform on your terms, meaning this platform would be different for everybody. This could then also create communities for like-minded people. Let me consent to my own community guidelines. What could this look like? An improvement of Instagram, their guidelines would be to mention the category of the content, giving you the opportunity to decide whether or not you can handle certain posts at certain moments, or choose to ignore. When you then change your guidelines, it would show the message. This change can be permanently or for 24 hours. When a post is shown, you can also define and rate the content of the post, resulting in a more correct description. Another option could be to decide not to let the filtered post show at all, so you wouldn't have to scroll past all of the blurred images.
Unlike a centralized operating system, we would just have decentralized guidelines, and I think this could perhaps have more influence on the experience. These are my guidelines. I do not consent to racism. I do not consent to queerphobia. I do not consent to transphobia. I do not consent to sexism. I do not consent to xenophobia. I do not consent to ableism. I do not consent to violence. I do not consent to murder. I do not consent to pro-ana. I do not consent to thinspo. I do not consent to diet culture. I do not consent to self-harm. I do not consent to harm. I do not consent to discrimination of any kind. I do not consent to ignorance. I do not consent to inequity. I do not consent to harassment. I do not consent to dick pics. I do not consent to the extremist right. I do not consent to hate. I do not consent to abuse. I do not consent to blackmail. I do not consent to extortion. I do not consent to fake news. I do not consent to pain. I do not consent to blurred pain. I do not consent to unwanted sexual attention. I do not consent to unwanted attention. I do not consent to attention. I do not consent for you to decide what I consent with. I do not consent to your guideline. I do not consent to you. I do not consent.